Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 64 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And once again, I'm sort of riding solo. Aaron's off doing some important things. So tonight on the show, we're always trying to find the right mix of technology, what's going on with the major vendors or technology providers, what's going on from customers and businesses, and then what's going on in the future. So tonight, I think we struggle with that sometimes. Tonight, I think we're going to have a really good mix of all of those things, and we're very excited to have a good friend of the show, an alumni of the show, Raejeanne Skillern, Director of Cloud Computing at Intel. Raejeanne, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Brian. It's good to talk to you again.
And you are out in Oregon this week, correct?
I am. That is where I live, on the West Coast of Portland, Oregon.
Out in the middle of the BCS kind of goings-on. You're a big Duck fan, correct?
Yeah, go Ducks, and I can't wait for them to finally take the title this year.
There you go. So the cool thing about talking with you is, and we were kind of chit-chatting about this before we hit the record button, is the cool thing about talking to Intel is we can talk about almost anything, because as long as it involves high-performance things, bandwidth, chipsets of all sorts of shapes and sizes, you guys are involved with that. I mean, that's got to be kind of a cool place to be in the industry. You get a lot of perspective on things.
Yeah, we do. And one of the things, I've been with the data center group at Intel for about 15 of my 19 years at Intel. And what I love about it is when we started, we really were just a chip company moving into the server space. Mm-hmm. And now we're a server network and storage company, and we're a silicon technology and software company. And we've really been able to expand across multiple segments, whether it's high performance or cloud or mission critical, and all those different capabilities. So it's been a wonderful perspective for me. Everybody says, why do you stick with the data center? Why don't you go do something interesting like mobile and consumer? And you know what? This is interesting. It changes every year, and it's been really a fun ride.
Yeah. I mean, just the stuff that you talked about. I mean, you talked about servers. So, I mean, obviously, Intel, famous for their server technology. The stuff changes every year, every 6 months. Just if we looked at the announcements from, say, like the Intel Developer Forum this past, couple months ago, reference architectures, chipsets, and a bunch of software for, network switching. So the whole, the Fulcrum acquisition. But let's talk about a few of them, just kind of for some perspective. So, previously Intel hadn't really been in the network space. It had been either, Cisco and their ASICs or Broadcom. You acquired Fulcrum about a year ago or so now. Talk about what's Intel's sort of view on networking. How far do you get involved with that? How far do the products go? How far does the technology kind of permeate?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting area to work on. I mean, what we've seen is a discussion of convergence across your infrastructure. The lines are blurred between what's storage, what's server, and what's network, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. If you take a server and you put more persistent memory in it, it's blending towards storage. If you take storage and put more intelligence in it, it's blending towards server. And if you take, in today's network, virtualized network environments, you're really crossing the line between servers and switches and networking silicon. And so you've seen over the last little while, Intel has been making investments and making acquisitions and building out our capabilities. And what we've done is, and it's not just at the silicon level. So we started with, we have our platform with our, one of our embedded CPUs and our Cave Creek chipset, which creates a really good baseline for packet processing, coupled with our 10 gigabit Ethernet NICs and LOMs to add high throughput. And then what we've done is we put in the Alta silicon, which, Alta was a switching silicon, excellent switching silicon, chosen by companies like Arista because it has key technologies in it, things like asynchronous programming, which gives you that control and ability to do intelligent packet processing and movement. And we've combined it into what's called Seacliff Trail. It's a reference platform.
Right.
And what people would think, oh, that makes sense for Intel, that stops at the hardware. But what we've also done is created it all the way up the stack. And we've layered in open source software, things like our Wind River hardened Linux platform, with open APIs. So there are switch adapter APIs. that you can write directly to the switch hardware. There's core switch APIs, and there's management APIs that you can write at the control plane level. And so what it does is to give a great flexibility of this platform. Now, we don't sell this platform directly, but it's a great enabling vehicle that shows how you can weave in silicon and software and APIs and create a more open, interoperable networking platform.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, it's sort of a reference platform. I think it's Seaview Trail.
Cliff Trail.
Right. So anybody could go pick that up. I suspect you're seeing a number of ODMs, OEMs, maybe some of the traditional networking vendors can go pick that up, and that's sort of that consistency, that standardization, that ability to, like you said, have consistent APIs that'll run from up to the application that they might need in the network, a network function, down to the kernel, the software kernel in the box, down to the hardware and the silicon. It gives them a level of consistency that you guys can differentiate in the technology space that but they can also differentiate really at the software layer. That's got to start to make kind of an interesting transition of how you work with some of those partners, but a lot of opportunity for differentiation that customers ultimately can value from, I would think.
Right, and this is what we've been trying to do is we just create the building blocks, and we're trying to give people a lot of options on how they want to put it together, and people will do it differently, but we're in kind of this enabling phase right now, working with a lot of companies, and then you'll start to see more products hitting the market in the future.
Okay, and you guys are you're taking that based on some other things that have been going on. I mean, you guys are taking that beyond just packet processing. There's been a big push around security. So I mean, the Intel TXT trusted environment has been gaining more and more traction. We're seeing more and more companies start to leverage that. The McAfee acquisition a little while ago. Where's the thought process around security and how to leverage hardware root of trust and sort of changing the security paradigm with Intel getting more and more involved with security?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because one, it's obviously one of the critical challenges when people talk about moving to the cloud, but two, it's also I think where people least expect Intel to play. Security, yes, but a lot of people don't think that in a cloud environment that the hardware could actually make a difference. Right. And what we're seeing as needs are evolving, as larger enterprises who are facing either regulatory or privacy issues or data protection issues, or are just looking how to manage a more scale-out elastic environment within a multi-tenant environment, security still remains a pressing issue. And they're looking for controls all the way down to the hardware level that give that added security and trust in the system. And TXT is one of the capabilities. It's secure root of trust in the hardware that allows, before the VM even boots, to check known good levels and check and then and keep track of that as that VM moves. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is, that matters to a service provider because obviously it gives them a sense of how they're going to control their data. It matters to the end users too, because they're getting more confidence in a service that has that hardware root of trust. And even we're seeing things like NIST evolving their standards, starting to ask and the requirements, requiring things like hardware root of trust. We're really excited that we're creating these capabilities that actually matter not only to the person building the cloud, but the person consuming the cloud. Right.
And I have to imagine, one of the, we talked about this in the past. We talked about before the show as well. Intel's in an interesting position because, for the most part, you don't sell directly to end businesses, to end customers, but you do take a very active role, whether it's talking to them just in a consultative role, whether it's through projects like the Open Data Center Alliance, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. I got to imagine in a lot of cases they're constantly pushing you to say, can you embed certain technologies further into what you do? So whether it's things like, in the future, flash for storage technology, which is a very hot space with independent companies, mm-hmm. but boy, if it was on the motherboard, if it was in the chipset, that would make it one less thing I can deal with. I mean, how do you kind of manage when customers are asking those things? Did we look at it as, do you look at yourself as a market enabler to help them understand, how to move forward? Do you look at it as we've got to try to embed things into our platforms as fast as possible? How does that balance sort of work between innovation for third-party companies and innovation from Intel?
We learned, maybe the hard way, but we learned when we started in this cloud environment a long time ago, our market segment share was very, very low. And what we learned really quickly that is if we started listening and realizing that we needed to not tell people what they needed to deploy, but listen to what they wanted to deploy, we could create better products and technologies. It's where we created more of our low power SKUs. It's where we created our power management technologies. It's where we've created security technologies like TXT and some of the encryption capabilities, the accelerators we put in for AES-NI and advanced encryption. By doing that, we believe we've created a better roadmap, and I think it's reflected in the fact that we've been able to grow market segment share in this cloud space to greater than 90%. And that's become the fundamental part of our strategy. Listen to the end user, create optimized products and technologies, and then figure out a way to make them broadly scalable to the rest of the industry so they can benefit. And we're fortunate. I mean, one of the things I do in my job is my team gets to have direct customer engagement with some of the world's largest cloud service providers. By having those collaborative engagements and looking not just at near term what they're buying today, but trying to be a technology partner over the next year, 2, 3, it really does give us the ability to try to adapt. And we know that if we don't, we won't win their business. So when we, things like non-volatile memory and how we make that more accessible in the server, how the security features, software orchestration, how we try to enable people to manage across heterogeneous environments and have more of a single pane console. All those kind of all that feedback, we have solution architects and planners, and they sit down with the customer, and it goes right into our planning process. Okay. Some short, some long. We can't always do everything, but it's what we do try to do.
Okay. Now let's talk for a second, because you I believe you're still directly involved with the Open Data Center Alliance, the ODCA. Let's talk a little bit about that, because Intel obviously does a very good job of talking about it. It's an industry consortium driven by customers. What is it, first and foremost, and what's Intel's involvement? How do you gain knowledge from it, and what's it ultimately driving?
Yeah, the Open Data Center Alliance is now over 300 companies, enterprise IT and service provider IT, companies that were all facing similar challenges and needs in the market, that realized if they came together and shared best practices and unified their voice, really, that if they put their voice collectively together, they could have more influence in the market and more of a collaborative relationship with the vendor community. And that's really where it forms. So the Open Data Center Alliance is really the buy side, and they act in an unbiased, vendor-agnostic fashion, and they create requirements. They try to look across all these different companies like Disney, BMW, UBS, Marriott, multiple verticals, multiple geographies, multiple sizes, big down to small. And they come together and they work across working groups and create these requirements. And for anybody who's really wondered what the value is, I would say just about a week or two ago, they released the master usage models, the requirements for building compute infrastructure as a service orchestration in that environment, and common commercial framework terms that you could use to negotiate cloud services. That then creates a path for people to deliver solutions. And you ask about Intel's role. Well, as I said, that's the voice of the end user. Well, we're not, we're more of a supplier, we're more of an everything than an end user. And what we've done is they asked us to serve as technical advisor because we've done a lot of industry SIGs and consortiums, and we have kind of 4+ decades of commitment to driving open standards and creating open interoperable solutions. So we just serve as technical advisor. Sometimes that's administrative. Sometimes, we get in and help collaborate, but we don't have a vote, and we don't make the decisions, but we do get to listen. And
as they're putting together standards, as they're putting together recommendations, what happens with those? I mean, how do they get turned into something that's actionable? It's not a standards body per se, but how does that get turned into things that they ultimately can say, we wrote this standard, and 6 months later, it's affecting the products that they buy or the way things come out that's going to help them.
Yeah, and this is the cool thing. So the Alliance also has this broad solution provider tier, which has, I think it's 25 or 30 of the leading hardware, software, and services vendors in the world that are now collaborating. So when they produce a requirement, the solution providers work with them to say, okay, how can we create solutions that meet these requirements? And what the board and the contributors and an adopter community, they're really committing to, walk their talk, right? Mm-hmm. So to use these usage models either in their RFPs or their contract negotiations to do proof of concepts that show how the solutions can be created. There was a really good one between National Australia Bank was at one of the board meetings and said, hey, I'd really like to test this gold security industry standard security level we're testing. I need a service provider. Terramark raised their hand and said, we'll do the handshake with you. Terramark built the gold service, tested it with National Australia Bank. They proved that there was still more work needed. They worked with the solution providers and then they iterated, and you'll start to see, I'm not necessarily speaking about that example, but that's how commercial services will be born going forward.
Okay, so you'll see, people sort of advertising, just like they would support any other set of standards or capabilities. You may very well see, ODCA specification X as something they'll advertise as a capability, and it's something that people can say, I can know what it is. I can know what to expect. Because that's one of the challenges with cloud services. Whether it's an Amazon or a Rackspace or whatever, they might say, well, we support OpenStack or we support CloudStack or we support whatever, but you don't really kind of know. It's not totally transparent. How do they do security? What does their network topology look like? And the hope is that this will add a level of transparency so that people feel more comfortable knowing this provider works in certain ways, they offer certain capabilities, it's been tested and so forth. Is that kind of the thinking behind it?
Exactly. Transparency for ease of comparison across services, as well as for enforcing and understanding the SLAs and the quality that you're going to get out of it. So that's really what they're trying to drive, and all these things will make it easier for them to build and consume cloud services. And you mentioned the standards body. The ODCA doesn't create standards, but they have liaisons with orgs like the Cloud Security Alliance and the DMTF and the Green Grid and a number of others, Open Compute and Oasis. So all those standard dependencies, they're doing joint work projects and things to help drive those standards needed to complete the requirements, just like they're working with the vendor community.
Okay, very cool. So I know you're a little bit time restrained. I want to be very conscious of your time. Let me ask you one last question, and if we get into some things that are kind of roadmappy, tell me, hey, we're not going to kind of go there. But as I'm looking at the things that Intel is involved with in supporting, so whether it's Open Compute, the Open Virtualization Alliance, obviously ODCA made a big presence at OpenStack. So a lot of open source efforts. Obviously, like you said, more and more software-based things, WAM Cloud and so forth. Now that security, which typically was always thought of as being kind of a software function, is now kind of being embedded into hardware, is it unreasonable to think that sometime in the future we may start seeing hypervisor technology, which is kind of a very distinct control point, even if it's open hypervisor technology, start to get embedded into the chipset? Or is that something that's much more complicated or not necessarily on any discussable roadmaps?
Well, here's the thing. I'm really not an expert on what that might be, but we do have deep enabling relationships for all the major hypervisors, right. Open source and some of our key capabilities we put in the chipset, in the components, right, are things like VT, virtualization technology, and things that help better enable it, and things like TXT. So beyond that, I don't even know enough to answer. And
okay.
But
no, that's fair. Like you said, there's things that accelerate it and enable it better. I mean, we're starting to see companies like Bromium who are kind of building micro virtualization that takes advantage of the hardware. I was just trying to figure out, like, will we see the next Xeon that says, hey, Zen or KVM is really now embedded and runs that much faster or something like that. So maybe something for people to look forward to in the announcements in 2013. But we'll see if that ever evolves. Well, very cool. Well, Raejeanne, as always, thank you so much for your time. We could probably go into a lot of things. I think if we get you back, I'd love to talk about at some point. All the you get a chance to see what's going on in the world. I think sometimes some of us in technology maybe are a little too U.S. centric. So hopefully we can get you back to talk about what's going on in China, what's going on in emerging markets. I almost feel like that could be a discussion all in and of itself. But I want to thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
So real quick, before we wrap up the show, for folks that want to know more about how you're involved, what Intel's doing with ODCA, what the cool things that Intel Data Center Group's doing, what's the best place for people to go find information, maybe catch up with you at a conference? Where can they find you or the information that you're out there driving in the marketplace?
Yeah, I could give you a whole list of resources. We could take an hour on that, but there's one good one that on the web, intel.com/IT center.
Okay.
We do try to make everything, or you can go to intel.com/data center or intel.com/cloud. Okay. You're going to get a lot of these key technologies and topics and trends that I've been talking about. Yeah. I also enjoy meeting people. You can, Twitter has been a great way for me to meet a number of people. I'm at Raejeanne, RAEJEANNE, S as in Sam, or S as in Skillern, Raejeanne S on Twitter, and I really do enjoy when people reach out, ask me questions, make a connection, and if we need to go deeper, I can definitely connect with people that way.
Okay, very cool. We will we'll put all those URLs and your Twitter handle in the show notes. So for folks who want to sync up and buy you a drink or talk to you at shows, they can definitely reach out. Well, very cool. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for the time, folks. If you like the show, tell a friend, leave us a review on iTunes. You can always follow us on Twitter or find us on the web at the cloudcast.net, where you can find everything else social media about the show. So for Raejeanne and for Aaron, who's off, but we'll be back next week. Thanks to everybody for listening, and have a great weekend.